Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 9th, 2019, 9:01 and 34 seconds. Just in case you were wondering, happy birthday to my brother. April 9th is his birthday, and though he's not listening, we say happy birthday anyway, in case anybody else listens and then tells him, hey, he didn't even say happy birthday to you. I try to remember these things, though the proof really is in sending you your birthday card on time, which, you know, depending on the mail systems, I may or may not have accomplished. Anyway, other things I need to take care of this morning do include pointing out, for instance, that, as Justice Putnam has done in the background here, Stephen Miller is a white nationalist, and I don't know if you knew that, but in case you didn't, I thought I'd tell you. If you did know and thought it was a controversial position to take, I thought I would clear that up for you too. This may be very interesting if this is what finally ends the let's dissect every word Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has to say and see if we can pin some sort of anti-Semitic charge on her and make it stick. I guess she came out and said as much on Twitter, and everybody on the right, I guess, began to pretend that she had said something horrific and out of the ordinary. It's something that people have been saying about Stephen Miller for a long time because he's a white nationalist, and people have noticed this. And the defense that they're throwing up in response is, well, his family, anyway, is Jewish, and so therefore it can't happen. It can't be true. How could you be a white nationalist, a Nazi, in other words, if you're Jewish? Which actually says quite a lot about a lot of things. This is actually, I think, the second person that I recall seeing the administration try to defend from charges of white nationalism by insisting that they or part of their family was Jewish. Well, actually, I guess the third person, Donald Trump, would be the first one. The second one was, what's her name? Who, I can't recall. Who cares? The Kavanaugh aide, I guess, or the Justice Department aide who was shepherding Kavanaugh through his confirmation hearings and who sat herself prominently behind him on television cameras and was giving frequently the okay sign, and everybody tried to pretend, she was signaling through the television to somebody that everything was okay with what she had read on her phone rather than answering on her phone to this person. Sure, some convoluted, crazy idea about saving her from charges of white nationalism, and she too was at least part Jewish. I think Donald Trump doesn't claim to be Jewish or part Jewish, but claims as a shield his daughter Ivanka, who I guess converted to Judaism when she married Jared Kushner. And so he can't be a white nationalist either. Stephen Miller's family is Jewish. I say it that way because, well, I don't think you can really be a actual practicing Jew and do the things that he does, but I suppose there's room for everything in the world. And, we haven't successfully disqualified most evangelical Christians from their Christianity by pointing out their practices, and it's probably not a good idea for anybody to try to do so, nor is it any better an idea to try to disqualify anyone from their Judaism. But still, the point is, it's pretty easy to, essentially the question is, can you be an a-hole and be Jewish? Sure. Absolutely. Let me introduce you to a few people if you don't believe me. Starting with Stephen Miller. Yeah, he's a white nationalist. Yes, Ilhan Omar knows that. No, her saying so isn't anti-Semitic. No, her saying so isn't false. No, her saying so isn't controversial. No, her saying so isn't groundbreaking. Stop trying to pin this stuff on her. She's just repeating what everyone else knows to be true about the guy, and he's awfully proud of it, and I think you should stop trying to make out like he's A, either in hiding, or B, like she's on to something or way out in front of the rest of us on that particular question. It's just not the case. All right. Let's see. There are so many other things happening. Since we were on the air yesterday, we shouldn't have to be on the air today. That's the way I feel about it. But as it turns out, I have scheduled for myself a daily show. And I'm going to have to live up to that. Speaking of which, Bill has given us our morning tweet, which we ought to acknowledge today. Maybe it'll give us some hint of what to do with today. Daily Kos Radio is live now. Welcome to it. Please note that Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, is still only the acting host, as he has not yet been confirmed by the Senate. And even when word comes of my confirmation, you should absolutely check the paperwork, make sure it's real and valid, and that there's no hiccups in the process. We're going to have to be doing this a number of times, as well as I was mentioning, since yesterday's show, there has been a widespread purge of the Department of Homeland Security. When we began the show yesterday, it was Kirstjen Nielsen who was on the outs, and we did cover that. And by the end of the day, the head of the Secret Service had been fired, and a few other people along the way too. And it's been a very strange pattern of firings. And as I have seen others note, it's kind of weird. Let's see, Digby yesterday noting Trump keeps purging all the departments that are tasked with counterintelligence, white-collar law enforcement, and electoral interference. Weird, huh? It is kind of strange. We also have the tweet of Zedary, or Zedediah Springfield, as his Twitter name reads. I guess you'll find him as Zedary on his Twitter handle, Zeddary. Kind of weird to fire your Secret Service director mere days after the Secret Service caught a probable spy at your private bribery mill. Kind of weird. Yeah, we're back on that story. You recall the Chinese woman who was arrested by the Secret Service, last weekend? And with on her person, I think, 4 cell phones and the USB thumb drive with malware on it, and we're still not entirely sure what kind of malware that is, although I did see somebody tweet around the story that I guess the Secret Service agent who filed the complaint, who swore out the affidavit against her, who we looked into, or we heard about last week when we read this story. What was his name again? His last name was like Ivanovich, right? Something crazy like that. Anyway, he described that when he found the thumb drive, that I guess they went to inspect what is this thumb drive and what's on it, and he plugged it into a computer at work, and it just began loading all this stuff onto the computer, which he thought was extraordinarily unusual, and security people were commenting, hey, Secret Service, don't plug suspect USB drives into any old computer. They can do some serious damage, especially if you suspect that they might be programmed to do just that. Anyway, it turns out that in her hotel room, I guess, where is this thing? Whatever happened to the, I thought I put this thing aside. There it is. That's actually a different angle on the same story. But somewhere I had put aside the story of what else was in her possession. And I think I just tweeted it or retweeted it. See, we can't scroll back. But I guess she had a couple more USB drives, a 5th cell phone, a bunch of additional SIM cards for the cell phones. It's been really kind of strange. Ah, yeah, there it is. I knew it was around here somewhere. Whose tweet is this? Curtis Houck. How does he say this last name? Houck. Managing editor of Newsbusters. Okay. Well, at any rate, he has video from CNN covering the story, and he has this to say about it. This is bonkers. We'll see how bonkers it is. CNN's Shimon Shimon Pro. What is that? Who's Shimon Prokupec? Wow, I'm probably mangling that name, and he probably says it on the air all the time. I just never watch. Anyway, he's updating us on what was found in the hotel room of the Chinese woman who, as we recall from the story, just wanted to use the pool or whatever at Mar-a-Lago / go to the Chinese-American United Nations event, etc. So what was found in the hotel room? Over $7,500 in $100 bills, which is not enough, I don't think, to raise up to the level of bribery money for Mar-a-Lago. Well, maybe $7,500 would get you something. But another additional 9 USB drives, 5 SIM cards, and a signal detector used to find hidden cameras, which would be very busy, beeping like crazy, I'm sure, at Pervalago. That would be a great thing. I'd love to bring a tool like that in there and find out how many hidden cameras there are. All right, so remember, of course, they found her initially with 2 different Chinese passports and 4 cell phones and the laptop and the external hard drive and the thumb drive with still undefined malicious malware on there. So it's looking more and more like a real spy situation, and it's just odd that the minute the Secret Service, don't you normally reward the Secret Service for intercepting spies? Sure, unless they're there to line the pockets of Donald Trump, or it's all been prearranged and she's supposed to be able to get in, and Donald Trump will profit in some other way in payoffs from the Chinese government, or whatever your theory might be. It's just odd that the Secret Service stops this person from getting in, sort of, and then they end up getting fired. An alternative explanation for it is you're fired because you didn't initially stop her, but it's the Mar-a-Lago management that the president uses to lean on the Secret Service to allow anybody who's paying or who might possibly be paying or be offended on behalf of someone else who paid for them to get in, whatever it is. You can't stop them from getting in hotel. Well, I guess it's sort of like a hotel. Club management will decide who gets in and who doesn't, and firing the Secret Service people over this, I don't know, doesn't make much sense. But none of it, I don't think that's the true explanation for what happened. I don't know why that would necessarily be the triggering case, but it's stupid, and I think that makes it attractive as a theory, because the president himself and most of the people that surround him are awfully stupid as well, and so it's easy to believe. There is another theory, though, about the dismissal of the Secret Service agent. Oh, look at this. It's been deleted. It was a tweet, which I wonder if I can get back to it and then read the old. This one I did pocket, but I think if I click on it, it just goes to the so let's see if we can find. Maybe it's been reissued. It was Christina Wilkie who had tweeted it out. Can I not find her here? I'll have to search around here. Anyway, this makes it all the more intriguing. Maybe it was withdrawn as a story, but that doesn't mean I won't report it, because it's a story now that it's been reported and withdrawn. Although, let's see. Here's the story of the withdrawal of the story. How about that? Initially, I had seen a tweet in which she said that 2 weeks ago, Trump's longtime friend Ron Kessler, who I don't recall ever hearing of, author of several White House security books, wrote in his newest book that the United States Secret Service Director Alice, I don't know whether he pronounces it like the German, but it's spelled like the German, Alles, should be replaced because he questioned spending on Ivanka Trump's security detail. Now, that tweet was very interesting and also sounded probable as far as reasons go for firing the guy because, again, it too was stupid and it had the additional benefit of being petty, which is a great way usually to predict or to come to understand what is it that Donald Trump is doing. Are you sure you know the motivations for what he's doing? When another motivation exists and that motivation is stupid and petty, don't bet on anything sensible if you haven't also considered the stupid and petty angle. However, it's since deleted. And what was the date on that one? Now that I'm looking at it here, because let's see, I've got this other. I went to look for Christina Wilkie's Twitter profile, and let me see, I'll open it up and comb through that one there. But then I came across, let's see. Oh, this is another mention of her. Okay, let's see. And this is from some time ago, and I guess another tweet, a different tweet that had been deleted. I guess it was up at the top of my search, so I thought that might be the answer here. But now I got to keep looking to see if I can figure out why it was deleted. Sometimes they're deleted because she's withdrawing the story, and sometimes deleted because it's revised and a better version of it with more linkages comes out. But yeah, I'm going to have to scroll a ways back. It's going to take some time to find this thing. That's too bad. All right, well, that blows up that initial story. I thought that one was going to be fun, and now it's going to take some additional work to try and track that one down. Along the way, though, I am reminded by scrolling through Christina's timeline that there was another story related to all this that NBC News was reporting. Do we have an actual NBC write-up on it? Because all I've got is their initial tweet from yesterday afternoon as a developing story. President Trump may also remove or reassign, remember this name from yesterday, Claire Grady from her role as acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Why? Because she's in the way. As we mentioned yesterday, whose tweets were we reading? Those will be parked in my archives at this point. Steve Vladeck, was that yes, it was Steve Vladek's tweet yesterday responding or playing off of the tweets of Ann Joseph O'Connell, noting that Donald Trump had wanted to use, or was claiming to use his power under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, remember, to name Kevin McCleenan, we decided his name would be pronounced on this show, as the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, but that by statute, it appeared that Claire Grady, Undersecretary for Management and the current acting Deputy Secretary for DHS, should have, by law, been, by default, the acting DHS Secretary instead. And we were wondering, well, how long would that last? And would there be a court challenge? And I guess they finally figured out that this put them afoul of the law. And so the developing story yesterday was, well, suppose we fire or otherwise reassign Claire Grady from her current role, and then the statute which designates her as acting DHS Secretary will be inapposite, and I don't know whether the next person down the list is Kevin McCleenan, whom he wanted in that job, or whether it just throws the doors open and you can take any of the undersecretaries or deputy secretaries, depending on the rank and hierarchy. So anyway, an additional firing or reassignment, at least rumored to be a part of the purge, Claire Grady getting pushed out of the way so that Trump can ignore the dictates of law once again. So here it is again, NBC News' tweet developing. President Trump may also remove or reassign Claire Grady from her role as acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security in order to install Kevin McCleenan, current CBP commissioner as the acting DHS secretary, according to 3 administration officials, all of whom are probably idiots and have no idea whether or not this move is legal. Let's see. That tweet thread starts off with the breaking news of Randolph Tex Alice. That's our previous, I guess, Secret Service head, who's being removed, and that's his full name. Tex is, I guess, the nickname. Removed as director of the U.S. Secret Service. Also breaking through the news yesterday, the fact that is well illustrated by this photo accompanying the tweet, that Mr. Alice has rather sizable ears. And Donald Trump, in his clever way, had taken to mocking the size of his ears and calling him Dumbo, which is hilarious in its creativity. I am not certain how he arrived. That's very weird. The size of the ears leading to the word Dumbo. Can make no connection. It must be his fabulous business mind. He's a really kind of a genius. He's got a very smart brain, and apparently no sense of self-awareness either. At any rate, so let's see. The rest of this tweet thread reads that Grady's departure, Claire Grady, may be necessary to avoid any legal challenges to McClellan's installation as acting DHS secretary, according to these officials, due to Grady's current place in the statutory order of succession. The official, one of the 3 anyway, says Alice was told that the president was preparing to make changes in leadership throughout DHS. The Secret Service is one component of the department. Then later on, they tweeted new news that President Trump had selected career Secret Service official James M. Murray to take over as director beginning in May. And let's see, anything more of interest? Senate Homeland Security Committee Chairman Johnson, noting, in addition to congressional dysfunction, I am concerned with the growing leadership void within the department tasked with addressing some of the most significant problems facing the nation. I wonder if he's all alone or has anything more to say than that he is troubled by all this. The record is replete with senators deeply troubled, like Susan Collins, all of a sudden, and not knowing exactly what, if anything, they could or should be doing about any of this chaos. And the answer is likely that they will sit on their hands and perhaps occasionally stand up so that they can wave them around a little bit and make a show for the camera. All right. Well, it's been very interesting. Albert Titus has this theory for us. It sounds like the person was trying to steal the Mar-a-Lago chocolate cake recipe. That could be. It was, after all, the president of China whom Donald Trump became convinced he had been so impressed with the deliciousness and beauty of the cake that Donald Trump held the very fate of China in the palm of his hand, I guess. And this is, so it stands to reason then that the Chinese would want to get a hold of that recipe in order to free themselves of this bondage. It seems quite likely. This is, I don't know. It's as likely as the rest of it. All right. Well, anyway, let's see. A couple of other stories we can choose from here. And why not go with a golf story? I think that's always a great place to start. I can't recall exactly how this one came to me, but it may have been via Twitter. Someone probably saw it and said, hey, more golf cheating stories. Can you believe it? There are still more gaps to fill in about Trump and his golf cheating. Rick Riley, I think, wrote the other piece we started to read the other day. He's still, I think, promoting his book. Is it the same guy? Yeah. Commander in Cheat, his new book. And so a slightly different take, this time in The Atlantic, titled, Whatever Trump is Playing, It Isn't Golf. Subheader here, the sport means a lot to Trump, which hasn't stopped him from cheating outrageously at it. And this time the story goes like this. I like the writing. More than any wife, you heard that right. More than any wife, more than any party, more than any opinion, President Donald Trump has remained fiercely loyal to golf. But I've played golf my entire life, our author says. Years ago, I even played with Trump once. Whatever sport he's playing, it isn't golf. He cheats. He lies. He kicks. And not just his ball, yours too. And that was one of the most important revelations of his last installment, that he not only cheats, but will sabotage other people who happen to be playing well. Anyway, he props up a 2.8 handicap that's faker than WrestleMania 35. He wins tournaments he never even played in. And it's linked to the golf.com story. I think we noted that one in the past. But how about this one? He wins tournaments that weren't even held. You like that? He does all of this because he has to win. A loss is to Donald Trump what a shower is to the Wicked Witch of the West. I like the turns of phrase here. He has to win no matter how much cheating, lying, and pencil erasing it takes. He has to win whether you've caught him or not. Maybe it was his father beating it into his kid brain. Win, win, win. Be a winner. Over and over. Maybe it was where he learned the game. Cobb's Creek, a scruffy public course in Philadelphia, full of hustlers and con men who taught him to cheat your opponent before he cheats you. Could be. What was he doing learning to play in Philadelphia? I guess, did he learn when he was at Penn? That late in life? I don't know. It probably wasn't a kid golfer. Anyway, it's not just the cheating. It's the way he plays the game. With all the golf etiquette of an elephant on Red Bull. Trump promised to make America great again. He's definitely made golf gross again. Well, we'll read a little bit about how exactly he did that, just for fun, and to transition into what comes next after this break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still scrolling through Christina Wilkie's Twitter feed and not coming up with what I am looking for, and I guess I've gone far enough back now. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not certain what the date and time of the tweet were. Does it say in Pocket? I can't even tell. Did it have it? No, you can't tell what the date was. All right, well, seem to have missed out on that one, and so the mystery remains why it was deleted, although I did see people immediately calling BS on it, like the idea that Donald Trump has friends seemed a little too far-fetched for some people. Anyway, those friends he had, I'm sure he lost through his cheating at golf. Picking up again with this story, and it's not terribly long. We spoke briefly about how his golf etiquette is so horrific. He drives golf carts on the greens. We know about that. He drives it also on the tee boxes, which is really pretty amazing because those are actually designed to be, you're supposed to be able to drive up right alongside the tee boxes and step out and go ahead and hit. There's really almost no reason to drive a cart on most tee boxes, but you never know. Anyway, he never ever walks the course, even on the courses that he owns that have banned carts, such as Trump Turnberry. I think that's the one in Scotland. And yeah, there are occasionally golf courses ban carts. though I think they usually make them available for handicapped patrons. But of course, if you own it, you can just claim that you're allowed to drive it wherever you want, and they have a cart there for him at all times. He always hits first, never mind who won the last hole. Another bit of golf etiquette those of you who don't play the game might not be familiar with. The winner of the last hole has the honors and is supposed to tee off first, but he goes ahead and grabs that opportunity for himself. That's fine by me. I don't like hitting first regardless, but okay. It's part of golf etiquette, and he pays no attention to what's going on around him. Of course, he hits first for this reason. He hits first, then jumps in his Super Mario Kart, his golf cart, with his caddy, who's carrying nothing because he's not there as caddy, and peels off before you even hit, which is actually quite distracting for people who are supposed to be concentrating on their drive. The better to be 150 yards ahead of you so that the two of them, he and the caddy, can foozle, fudge, and foot wedge in private. In other words, they get down there, kick a bad shot of his back into the fairway, kick a good shot of yours into the woods, and pretend that's all fair. He plays only at clubs with his name on them, and only with caddies who love his $200 a round tips, although I'm sure most caddies do. He plays only in those awful 2 sizes too small cotton Dockers with the 1995 pleats. Does he own golf shirts in any other color than white? Yes, he does. I have seen them. He plays only with rich people and almost entirely with men, and not one Democratic member of Congress yet. And you shouldn't go, even if he invites you, I would add. It stinks because we're finally getting somewhere with golf, or we were finally getting somewhere with golf. It used to be an elitist game until the 1960s, when a public school hunk, named Arnold Palmer brought it to the mailmen and the manicurists. Then an Army vet's kid named Tiger Woods brought it to people of color all over the world. We had ultra-cool golfers like Woods, Ricky Fowler, and Rory McIlroy, and pants that don't look like somebody shot your couch, although we're getting back into that. And we've gotten the average round of golf down to $35, according to the National Golf Foundation. Still pretty pricey. We were finally making the game cool and healthy and welcoming. For a golf writer, I guess you can get away with saying that. And along comes Trump, elbowing his way into the front of every camera, and hurling my sport backwards 50 years to its snobby roots. That's not just talk, that's what Trump wants. And there's a quote here from a story in Golf Digest. I'd like to see golf be an aspirational sport, Trump told Golf Digest once, where you aspire to join a club someday. You want to play. You go out and become successful. Hey, middle class, your president doesn't think you deserve golf. Care to try pickleball? I have no idea what that's supposed to be. My book is called Commander-in-Cheat, How Golf Explains Trump. So how does golf explain Trump's presidency? Well, if Trump will cheat to win $20 from his friends, is it that much further to believe he'd cheat to lower his taxes, win an election, sway an investigation? Trump will lie and say one of his courses is worth $50 million, while at the same time suing the local tax board for valuing it at more than $2 million. We feel you, Austining, New York. I guess who's that having that problem, although they may not recognize that it's them I'm talking about if I mangled their name. Anyway, is it that much further to think he might lie about his taxes, his fixer, his affairs? I used to have a coach who said, how you do one thing is how you do everything. It's true. To wit, in politics, Trump says his father was born in Germany. He wasn't. He insisted that he said Tim Cook, Apple. He didn't. He says he gave Puerto Rico $91 billion. It was $11 billion. And in golf, Trump says he's won 20 club championships. He hasn't. The truth is, he played a lot of those, quote, championships by himself the first day his latest course opened and declared himself the champ. How do I know? He told me the day we played together in the early 2000s. Now in politics again, Trump thinks climate change is a hoax. In golf, we learn that this is true except in Ireland, where his lawyers petitioned to have a 2,000-foot seawall built to fight the, quote, rising sea levels caused, quote, by climate change. Hello. How do we know? Those are the exact words in the petition. Back to politics. Trump won't release his taxes. Well, golf explains it. If the House ever gets his returns, they should start with his golf write-offs. For instance, did you know, yes I did, that Trump keeps 8 goats in a pen on his Trump Bedminster course in order to get an $80,000 farm tax credit? I didn't know it was $80,000, but I do remember that. And if they catch him, he can always just ask, Republican senators to eat the grass at Trump Bedminster, and they'll probably fight one another to get in a good place in line to do it, too. All right, back to the article. Donald Trump does not represent the world of golf. He repels it. Most American golfers, about 90%, it says here, play on public courses, not country clubs, according to the National Golf Foundation. Every golfer I know plays by the rules, aside from a first tee mulligan. Everyone except him. Every golfer I know finishes his round, and even before his beer, immediately posts his score in the GHIN computer, the handicapping network. So everybody knows that a bet with him will be fair, except Trump. In 2018, Trump played an estimated 60-plus times. He posted just one score. You're not supposed to be able to cherry-pick the scores that you post. You're supposed to post them all. Armando is busy disagreeing, saying it's not the case that the golf world has rejected Trump, but that they have embraced him. And there's certainly a significant portion of the golf world that has embraced him. I mean, his clubs would be empty and bankrupt if it was the case that they truly rejected him. I think he's talking about a very narrow slice of people who make golf their life and who are guardians of the game, so to speak. I think the casual or even avid golfer who belongs to a Trump course, for the most part, in some cases is very similar to Donald Trump. In other cases, simply doesn't care. And then, of course, as he points out, there are the famous golfers who agree to play golf with him. I think there are a number of them who initially have agreed to play along with him in the early days, because that's the sort of a thing that a professional golfer would do. When invited by the President of the United States, jackass or not, you go. But I think now it's pretty clear. Though there have been some golf figures who have previously had a relationship with him that have distanced themselves. Bernhard Langer, for instance. That's one. But golf in general has as many kinds of people who play it and as many approaches to playing the game as there are people who do it, just like pretty much anything else. So, I don't know. I think at this point the guy needs some filler words for his article. I've already told you about all the cheating stories, and so we'll tell you, non-golfing audience, something about the culture of golf, which is as artificial a construct as anything else, to make the story sound worse. Let's see. I think there's a couple more points to be extracted from another paragraph or two here. Donald Trump, though, the argument goes, does not represent the world of golf, and I think that's probably true. He repels it. That much, I think, is probably well disputed by Armando. Where were we? Right, that he played an estimated 60-plus times and posted only one score. While writing my new book about Trump's cheating, I left calls, emails, and even FedEx letters for him and his people and got no replies. Meanwhile, he's still telling America he's this champion golfer, and he isn't. How do I know? Whenever he's played in front of cameras, and he notes here the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and then, of course, the one I keep coming back to, the Tahoe Celebrity. In other words, the American Celebrity Classic in Lake Tahoe, where I've seen his scores, where they posted the actual scores, and you could tell he kind of, was an average hack. That was, of course, unless he's blaming it on Stormy Daniels. That was the same tournament at which he ended up hooking up with Stormy Daniels after trying to get another 2 or 3 other porn stars involved in the situation as well. Stormy Daniels wasn't even his first choice, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Don't mean to insult you, Stormy, but okay. Anyhow, whenever he's played in front of cameras, he's not once made a cut or finished in the top half among the celebs. Again, for those of you not familiar with golf terminology, a full-fledged, professional level tournament usually consists of 4 rounds played, typically Thursday through Sunday. The first 2 rounds, everybody who enters the tournament plays the first 2, and then for the second 2 rounds on Saturday and Sunday, they make a cut. They take a look at the field, and they make statistical analysis, and they draw a line somewhere. I don't know what the idea is, whether they're cutting half the field or cutting some percentage. But anyway, if you've had a bad first couple of days and your score isn't under wherever the statistics say they should draw the line, then you're cut from the field and you're out. And only the people who are still in contention play on Saturday and Sunday. So whenever he's played in a full-fledged pro-am or professional amateur mixed tournament and people have been able to force him to keep a real score, he's never made the cut. He's just not that good. Again, he's a perfectly respectable, average, weekend golfer. In fact, not really relatively good, but he's perfectly decent, it seems, from the scores that I've seen and everything else that we hear about him. But there's no reason in the world to be telling people that you're a scratch golfer, that you have a 2.8 handicap, that you could have turned pro, that, people are always telling you should have been a pro golfer. Just be a regular hack. It's fine. Anyway, this winds up by saying, I'm just a sports writer. I'm not an expert on politics, immigration, or the Mueller report, but I can tell you one thing. When it comes to golf fraud, President Trump is not exonerated. That is a really lame finish, to be honest. And once again, probably the product of a word count dispute with his editor. All right, let's see. What other sorts of nonsense have we to round up for you? Still haven't been able to find this Christina Wilkie's story, which is too bad. Let's see. I think in reading that story on the Atlantic's site, I stumbled across this piece from David Dayen at the Atlantic site as well. And I was intrigued both by the headline and then the notation that they put under David's name, indicating a little biographical note saying, incoming executive editor of the American Prospect. Did you know that? Probably. You might have heard him say it on Twitter. I didn't, so we'll congratulate him on that. The headline that was so intriguing, nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing Trump said was true. Okay, in which instance? This about private companies such as the Trump Organization operate under very lax accounting rules, says the subheader. This one, I think, about the statements of financial condition that Donald Trump routinely gave to, for instance, I think most famously, Deutsche Bank, in pursuit of loans or in pursuit of other financial deals. These are things that Michael Cohen told us about, how he would routinely overstate his net worth and the value of his various investments in order to induce partners to extend him credit or partner with him on various ventures. And, well, I guess David has the goods on just how extensive the fraud might have been with respect to how he stated his net worth. It begins this way. We have compiled the accompanying statement of financial condition of Donald J. Trump. Reads part of a 2-page disclaimer from the accounting firm Mazars USA. I don't know if we've got their pronunciation correct, but who cares? They're fraudsters, I guess. We have not audited or reviewed the accompanying financial statement and accordingly do not express an opinion or provide any assurance about whether the financial statement is in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. What a disclaimer. This notice, routinely attached to financial statements that Trump used to secure loans and insurance before he became president, amounted to a dry warning that nothing the businessman said was necessarily true. As detailed in the Washington Post, Trump's statements of financial condition for the years 2002, 2004, 2011, 2012, and 2013 contained numerous exaggerations and falsehoods. Trump claimed that his golf course, there we are again, in California, had 55 lots ready to sell. It had 31. He said his Virginia vineyard sat on 2,000 acres. It was about 1,200. He added 10 stories to Trump Tower in New York. He might as well have added an aside about my wife, Morgan Fairchild. Yeah, that's the ticket. That's where he's borrowing that one from. The overhyped statements probably don't offer much to prosecutors as actual evidence. That is, something that could be used in a fraud investigation against Trump or his business. The disclaimers literally say not to trust anything in the documents. It's hard to prove intent to deceive when the dishonesty is so out in the open. Maybe. These statements do, however, offer a window into the world of privately held companies such as the Trump Organization, which operate under very lax accounting rules. Trump's accountants at Mazars freely admitted in legal proceedings quoted in the Post story that all they did was write down numbers Trump supplied. In the compilation process, it's not the role of the accountant to assess the values, said one accountant in a deposition. The value per se does not have to be logical. A public company must issue audited financial statements every quarter so that investors and lenders can make informed choices about stock holdings. Outside of financial firms, however, private firms operate under no such mandate. They are not required to have a reputable accounting firm audit or double-check their financial statements using generally accepted accounting principles, which is an actual term of art here, and has its own acronym, GAAP. You'll be shocked to know, are you shocked? Let's find out, that some companies take advantage of this fact. For example, I need to catch up on these guys by watching the documentary. Theranos didn't produce audited financial statements for years, even as it duped investors into funding its overhyped blood test ambitions. Theranos didn't have a full-time chief financial officer or an accurate budgeting and cash flow forecast until the middle of 2017, 14 years after it was founded, and well after raising $700 million from investors. Those investors bought in after receiving marketing materials with financial projections that had little reality behind them. Sound familiar? I probably should have saved this thing for Friday now that I think about it, but I don't know. I'm always up for reading a David Dayen article. Critics have thoroughly questioned Uber's financials, which have rather suspiciously become less sunny as the company works up to an initial public offering when it will have to provide audited financial statements. Even Warren Buffett, according to Francine McKenna at MarketWatch, adjusts his bottom line with unconventional accounting. Just like the Wall Street bankers and corporate CEOs, he frequently criticizes for adjusting standard earnings to tell a better story. No one has credibly accused Buffett of taking advantage of investors, it says here parenthetically. While elites scammed by Theranos might not inspire much sympathy, smaller investors might suffer under the status quo too, especially after the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act a 2012 law that reduced financial reporting requirements for startups and enabled them to collect seed money through crowdfunding. Unsophisticated investors who get only limited and often unvetted financial information from private companies can easily find themselves on the wrong side of a scam. The Securities and Exchange Commission does, of course, place some rules on private company accounting, but the agency has been dogged by accusations of lax enforcement. The Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, created after a series of accounting scandals in the early 2000s, provides another layer of scrutiny to the auditing companies that look over corporate books, but as the title reveals, PCAOB doesn't apply to privately held companies. None of this is to suggest that public companies are totally upfront and transparent at all times. MarketWatch found that of 174 large public companies that reported fourth quarter earnings in 2018, only 6 completed their legally required audit before releasing their financials. By putting the cart before the horse, companies put pressure on auditors to stick with the reported numbers, even if they're not quite right. The system also benefits corporate insiders who might trade on information about audit findings before they become public. Trump's presidential game playing, then, or pre-presidential game playing, should be properly understood as on the spectrum of normal in a financial netherworld that the U.S. government does too little to regulate. Corporate boasting with less than rigorous numbers is an all too regular occurrence. And thanks to Trump, this lack of rigor might become even more widespread. In August, Trump directed the Securities and Exchange Commission to study whether to let public companies release financial disclosures only twice a year, as opposed to the current quarterly format. This is great news for corporations, which can reduce compliance costs, and bad news for business partners and investors who will have access to less data and less reliable data. Trump is inviting all of corporate America to be even more like him than it already is. An important piece, I guess, to keep in mind, I don't even know if there's still people out there that say dumb things like, we need a businessman in the White House. I guess Howard Schultz says that to himself. But I don't know. It's a topic we've been over here on the show that... But I think that makes it all the more important to make the distinction. Do keep in mind when you're analyzing these things, whether you're talking about public companies or private companies, and that the burdens of reporting are much, much different for public companies. And keep that in mind when we think about, well, we need a businessman in the White House because businessmen are all about accountability. Publicly held companies, the businesses, or rather the businessmen and women who run publicly held companies are supposed to be all about accountability. I mean, they very frequently find themselves being indicted and arrested, I guess with some less regularity than the rest of us. The accountability that's implied when we talk about, we need a businessman in the White House and somebody who knows how to run a business, doesn't apply in privately held business like Trump's, and in particular, the Trump organization. I mean, he's just, I think, runs a particularly egregious example of it, even though Dan points out here that his kind of cheating is pretty commonplace and within normal tolerances in the privately held business world. May be true, but it seems to me like he makes up for it in volume, let's say. But also the fact that he's gone on to become president, that he's brought the mantra of we need a businessman in the White House to life, gives us the opportunity to examine the wisdom of that. And while we might do better by putting a person who's run a publicly traded company in the White House, there's no guarantee that they'll run things the same way, but that I guess, once again, it should just be used to make the point that he's never run a business in which he's responsible to anyone other than himself. And the whole idea, the unspoken part of we need to put a businessman in the White House is that because it's because they know how to run an operation that's accountable to others and occasionally takes the welfare of others, usually other investors, into account when making decisions. Trump doesn't even have that. Even that limited reign on his run, I guess. I mean, the executives who run publicly traded companies surely take other people into account, but only other rich people who've invested in their companies. They don't. Of course, that's ground we've been over too. They're not interested in the other stakeholders. They're only interested in the shareholders. So that's an extraordinarily limited universe that they tend to consider in making their decisions anyway. But take away even that consideration, and you're really in trouble. And the idea of passing off someone who runs a small, privately held family business that's in that's really in the business of scamming other people about what its net worth is, it's a bad bet. A worse bet even than putting a businessman in the White House. So I don't know. I thought it was worth reminding ourselves of that problem. Another connected article about the business world I see here, but we'll probably save for Friday, as I remind you that I'm going to be on travel again this upcoming Friday. We'll try and prepare a show for you, and I'm already getting some idea of what might be a part of that show as I look at the connected articles that I think would make good follow-ups. But you're going to have to wait until Friday for this follow-up. Okay, second break coming up here, just a minute to gather our wits about us and take a look at the rest of what's in pocket and discuss the rest of it in the upcoming hour of the show. I think we'll make a switch back over to a closer focus on politics rather than on the political economy. We'll save the rest of that for Friday and be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, just a quick observation that I happened to see fly by on Twitter and brings us back to the earlier part of the show. A tweet from Adam Kotzko. We'll ask Adam. Adam, how do you pronounce it? And he won't answer us because we don't follow one another. But I happen to see this retweeted into my timeline. I think it makes a good and succinct point about Ilhan Omar and Stephen Miller, as we brought up at the beginning of the show. He's just noting, puts it very well, I think here, concern trolling about anti-Semitism has become one of the most powerful rhetorical tools of white nationalism. I don't know if it's really become one of the most powerful tools, and I don't know how powerful the tools of rhetoric white nationalism actually are, but I guess you could rank it among the more popular ones at the moment anyway. That is a good dodge, and it sometimes works. People are stopped in their tracks occasionally by accusations of anti-Semitism. It hurts people, and they pull up short to see, and I guess sort of check themselves to see whether it's really true. And that's sometimes all the gap that the white nationalists need in the action in order to either escape or drive a truck through whatever rhetorical loophole they've then created for themselves. Okay, let's see. A couple other items here, and I'm trying to keep track of the stories we've dealt with along the way so that I can provide them to Scott for the daily roundup, but it's not all that easy. Okay, here's another suggestion for direction that I think we'll take up for a moment. I would consider it a follow-up to the news we read the other day. Kate Sherrill was intrigued by, I guess, was it last Friday's taped show, or was it the previous one, in which we were discussing the weird outcome of law enforcement authorities of one sort or another coming to the conclusion that street demonstrations taking place between, well, the white nationalists and the Antifa folks were describable in their minds as a clash between Antifa and anti-Antifa, that there was no fa in all of this. There was just Antifa and anti-Antifa. And, well, there's more to be gleaned from that story. But at the meantime, she shares with me this tweet, which caught my eye and looked like a good follow-up here. From, whose tweet am I reading here? The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. There we are. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And the tweet reads, as black activists protested police killings, Homeland Security worried they might join ISIS. Interesting conclusion. That concern was unequivocally baseless, obviously, and no evidence ever emerged to substantiate it. Coverage here in The Intercept would be very much up their alley to take a look at that. Who's the writer here? Alice Sperry. I don't believe I've read any of her work at The Intercept or anywhere else for that matter. Interesting, though. I mean, I guess I don't know enough about the situation to be able to tell what comes first here, chicken or egg, but I'm wondering whether the germ of not even really truth that arises in all this is, I guess, alongside the emerging storyline of, again, Russian disinformation, meddling in American political affairs, whether that was meant to directly affect the outcome of the election or not. There's, I don't know whether maybe the security folks who thought they were spotting this were in fact spotting something, but spotting instead a disinformation, Russian trolling and puppetry game. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if you could come up with, a bot-fueled attempt at luring people in on the, under the precept of a Black Lives Matter's offshoot of sorts. And we know that they did that. We know that the Russian troll farms put together, what did they call it? I can't recall what they called their version of Black Lives Matter. And, but it was very evocative of the same name. And, it was very much meant to, bring people in through their initial interest in Black Lives Matter and steer them in a very different direction. And I could see a troll farm effort to steer people to saying, not only will we bring you in with Black Lives Matter and then say, the white establishment stacks everything against you, all of which is, understandable and true. And then just to sort of steer them to, therefore you don't owe America anything in particular, including your allegiance, and maybe you ought to think about making common cause with others in the world who likewise, despise the corrupt American system. Well, there would be a number of such people out there, and I guess ISIS would be among them. It would be a tough sell, and you'd have to do it carefully, and I don't know whether it would really work or whether that's just something that is would end up being so clumsily done by the Russian trolls that it would be immediately obvious, but things that you and I think are immediately obvious don't always occur to everyone else. Or is it just the invention of weirdos and basically white supremacists inside the security and security consulting apparatus? That's possibly true. All right, let me take a look at this thing here. As black activists protested police killings, Homeland Security worried they might join ISIS. Let's see what the theory is here. As nationwide protests against police killings of black men began rolling across the country in 2014, federal and local law enforcement who were closely monitoring protesters' online activities repeatedly expressed a bizarre concern that the mostly black activists demanding an end to police violence in the U.S. might join with Islamic fundamentalist groups promoting violence abroad. I don't know. Well, I should just read on. I'm curious whether there's anything to this. That concern was unequivocally baseless. I mean, if it's totally baseless, I guess it won't be reported in this article. But okay, or let's go on. Unequivocally baseless, and no evidence ever emerged to substantiate it. Still, documents obtained by the government transparency group Property of the People, they keep coming up, which were shared exclusively with The Intercept, and that relationship persists as well, revealed that officials with the Department of Homeland Security, which has been cleared out apparently, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence exaggerated the significance of isolated social media activity, mostly by foreign accounts, advocating for a connection between the domestic movement against police brutality and foreign terrorism. All right, it sounds like we may have hit it right here. I don't know why I don't just read the damn articles instead of theorizing. I love, that's my favorite hobby, is reading the headline and trying to guess the contents of an article and then reading to see if I'm right. I don't know what that does for any of us. In intelligence reports and internal communications circulated around the time of the protests in Ferguson, the 2015 Baltimore protests following the death of Freddie Gray, DHS officials fretted that the Islamic State might attempt, quote, to use the situation in Ferguson as a recruitment tool, or call on Baltimore rioters to join them. And they might, but it wouldn't work. And in July of 2016, during nationwide protests against the police killings of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, a cabinet position, circulated a memo warning that a lone foreign pro-Al-Qaeda Facebook user sought to seize on the protests to urge black Americans to take up arms and start armed war against the U.S. government. So one guy has said this. Okay. The next section here is called A Fixation Born of Bias. Sounds plausible. These official warnings that U.S. activism against police violence might be exploited as a recruitment opportunity by violent foreign terrorist groups slightly preceded the FBI's designation of a black identity extremist domestic terrorism category. That seems premature. Which essentially cast large numbers of the same black activists as potential homegrown violent extremists. Convenient. As The Intercept has reported, the FBI's Black Identity Extremism label, while first used in a 2017 threat assessment report, originated on the heels of the Ferguson protests, and the first individual the FBI designated as a black identity extremist was a young Ferguson protester the agency had entrapped. But, just as there is no evidence that a black identity extremist ideology actually exists, there's also no evidence that the U.S. activists ever saw or in any way responded to sporadic social media calls to join foreign fundamentalist Islamic groups. If anything, the critics say, law enforcement's fixation on that non-existent connection is testimony to both their anti-black and anti-Muslim biases. To make it more scary, it's like if we link Islam to it, and we link Muslims to it, then people will see this as a real threat because nothing is scarier than Muslims. Umar Lee, a well-known St. Louis activist who is Muslim, told The Intercept, referring to the movement for black lives that started in Ferguson, nothing is scarier than, hey, if the Muslims get together with these scary black dudes, then we got a real problem, so we need every resource available to stop this. And I think that's at the heart of what they scare white people with when they talk about the Nation of Islam, too. They already have a massive amount of funding to do quote-unquote counterterrorism. That's actually in the quote here. The quote says quote-unquote. This is Lee's comment here. They already have a massive amount of funding to do quote-unquote counterterrorism and countering violent extremism and all these other things that they do, Lee noted, referring to well-funded domestic intelligence initiatives that have primarily targeted U.S. Muslims. And they come up empty because the reality is that there are very few, hardly any people engaged in these activities. By the way, another source of schemes like this that are just as likely as being the origin as any Russian troll farm could very well be undercover operations of Department of Homeland Security or FBI aimed at entrapping people and getting them. If they put up the front that there should or ought to be some connection between Black Lives Matter and ISIS and get anyone to bite, they'll come and arrest them. They could be the source of this as well. All right. Civil rights advocates maintain that the document's message is both baseless and dangerous. Blackness and Muslim identity have been cast as threatening since America's founding, said Omar Farah, I'm not certain how he pronounces it, a senior staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, which sued the FBI and DHS to obtain more information about its surveillance of black activists. No surprise, then, that these documents reveal near obsessive fear of their intersection. It's inflammatory, echoed Nusrat Chowdhury, deputy director of the American Civil Liberties Union's Racial Justice Program. Just because members of foreign organizations are calling on domestic protesters to join their movements, that does not show these people in the United States are posing any threat of violence. The ACLU, which together with the Center for Media Justice also sued the FBI to obtain more information about the secretive black identity extremism label, warned that casting individuals who express legitimate grievances as extremists risks exposing them to police harassment and stifling a movement that is badly needed. There are long-standing, deep structural racial injustices in America, and people are allowed to call on this country to do better, Chowdhury said. They're allowed to do it under our Constitution, and frankly, we need them to do it because that is what was always led to racial justice in America. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence did not respond to a request for comment from The Intercept. DHS declined to comment on the record. Next up, fictional connections to international terrorism. We'll read one more of these sections at the very least. It appears to be a pretty long article here, but very interesting. The documents obtained via public records requests by Property of the People supplement similar documents previously made public by CCR and the racial justice group Color of Change. Ah, yes. The earlier set of documents includes Islamophobic press coverage shared by DHS officials during the Baltimore protests, such as a Fox News story claiming that Muslim groups seek to co-opt Ferguson protests, and an op-ed warning that the Islamic State, which has stunned the world for its filmed beheadings and abuse of non-Muslims, is looking to capitalize on growing racial tension in American cities by claiming that there is, quote, no difference between black and white in their society. It also includes an FBI situation report issued less than 2 weeks into the Ferguson protests, warning that ISIS supporters are urging Ferguson protesters to embrace radical Islam and engage in further violence. They are also reportedly telling any ISIS supporters in the U.S. to travel to Ferguson. Senior federal law enforcement assessing hysterical tabloids about ISIS co-opting the Ferguson protests is foolish, said CCR's Farah. It would be comical if there weren't dangerous implications for people of color and Muslims who speak out for justice only to be met with militarized police responses. The new set of documents, a selection of which The Intercept is publishing with this story, includes more internal assessments and emails exchanged by federal and law enforcement officials between 2014 and 2016. And remember, keep in mind, this is the Obama administration. In a partially redacted document marked for DHS internal use only, circulated days after a grand jury in Missouri declined to indict Officer Darren Wilson for Brown's killing, officials warned that a purported fighter with the Islamic State posted 2 images earlier today regarding Ferguson, calling for the protesters to swear loyalty to the Islamic State. I'm sure that would go over huge. The document also noted that the images were making their rounds on English language support accounts for the Islamic State, though it made no mention of whether anyone affiliated with the Ferguson protests actually saw or responded to them. In another redacted DHS intelligence document, released at the height of the 2015 Baltimore protests, officials warned that the account of the presumed USPER, or U.S. person, that would be I don't know how they pronounce it, USPER? No idea, actually. How would they say that out loud? Anyway, it's a term used by intelligence officials to refer to U.S. citizens and residents, had called upon indigenous peoples of the Americas and Afro-Americans who are oppressed to attack Anglo-American supremacists. We know who they are. The report continued, there were multiple references to the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, which was likely designed to resonate with an audience wider than redacted name has typically targeted. The messaging reflects redacted names' awareness of recent U.S. media coverage of perceived racial and other issues in American society, which the group is trying to exploit. As in the earlier case, this assessment, too, offers no indication that anyone involved with the protests actually saw the posts. Although, this is just a modern equivalent of the same charge that always was made by the national security apparatus that, for instance, Martin Luther King's civil rights movement was actually communist agitation, that they too had taken note of racial tensions in the United States and sought to exploit it as a dividing line by attempting to persuade civil rights leaders that this sort of injustice wouldn't stand in a communist country like the Soviet Union. It would be anathema to their system, and that why give your allegiance to a country that continues to persecute, harass, intimidate, and belittle you, when instead you should be, I guess it would be their idea, giving your allegiance over to a system that purports to outlaw and disbelieve such divisions. Don't know that it was ever true of the Soviet Union or anyone else, but that was the play. In December of 2015 in Minneapolis, following the police killing of Jamar Clark, DHS posted a report indicating that it was closely watching the social media accounts of a number of people and noted that one user expresses support for Islamic State and another posted a photo revealing an Islam is Life tattoo. DHS again reported that a U.S. person posted a call for Islamic State support in July of 2016, days after the police killings of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. Shortly after that, as the deaths of Castile and Sterling were followed by deadly attacks on police officers in Dallas and Baton Rouge, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence issued a warning based on the Facebook posts of a Bangladesh-based Al-Qaeda supporter. Good old Facebook. Thanks for bringing us the Bangladeshi issue. The user called on Black Americans to draw inspiration from Micah Johnson, who on July 7th had killed 5 police officers and injured several others at a protest against police brutality in Dallas. Like the Dallas attacker in U.S., we appeal to the other Negro Americans to jump into the agitation and to realize their rights, the user wrote, according to the intelligence memo. Pick up arms like this attacker against the terrorist U.S. armed forces. Fight for your rights. I'm sure that would be met with a lot of enthusiasm in ISIS, but I don't think it is likely to be met with much enthusiasm here in the United States, even among people justifiably angry about police killings. All right, well, I think you get the idea of this, and there's a lot to it, and I absolutely recommend that we all thumb through it and get some idea of what sort of manipulation is imagined, at least, to be out there, whether it's actually being perpetrated by foreign nationals or Russian trolls, or for that matter, undercover law enforcement folks right here in the United States. But it's an awfully long article, and I think you get the point of it, and I thank you for sharing it with us, and a good reminder of another topic that we really ought to be spending a considerable amount of time on every once in a while anyway, just to remind ourselves of how easily you can be sucked into something incredibly stupid and maybe possibly dangerous, and how easy it is as well for law enforcement who could theoretically deprive you of your rights and liberty if they come to believe that you've been sucked in by it, being sucked in by it by themselves, if they come to believe that the temptations are being offered, whether or not it's really true, and sometimes they can be being offered by the left hand of law enforcement without the right hand of law enforcement knowing what that left hand is doing, it's worrisome and dangerous. And a good point here made by our friend Culture of Truth, who tweets as Bobble Speak. Didn't Donald Trump spend a year campaigning against the corrupt American system of government? Yes. Many people do. Many people did. Many people continue to do it. I think Bernie Sanders could likewise be said to have done the same, from that very broad description of campaigning against the corrupt American system of government. I think we all do that at some point. But yeah, Donald Trump did so as well, and did so from the right. And it's constantly the refrain of the American right that America is a hellhole, and that they're the only ones who know how to fix it, of course, assuming it can be fixed. But they're constantly railing against the corruption of the American system of government, not realizing, of course, that most of us think that, we know what you'll do with the American system of government. Should you be given the reins of power, you'll corrupt it even worse, but in a different way, and one that you will think is entirely fair because it benefits you, and you're all a bunch of selfish idiots. Anyway, a good point, and a good way of, I hope, closing out this chapter and transitioning. So thanks, Kate, for sharing that piece. Wasn't expecting to go in that direction today, but that's what makes the show fun for me. I don't get to sit there and listen to it. It's work to do the show, but it's fun when it takes a direction that I had no idea it was going to take. And that's every day, because I try not to plan too much about it. Sometimes I think I should change that approach to the show, but part of what makes it fun for me is the unplanned version of it. All right, let's see. Speaking of unplanned things, something I saw yesterday in Politico. I forget what article we were reading in Politico, but I saw this one promoed alongside it. And look, the promos work. Throw me a fun-sounding, interesting-sounding headline. I'll click on your clickbait and make the rest of the audience listen to it as well. But sometimes it's good stuff. It gives us things to discuss. This is what I discovered in Politico yesterday. The headline being, "What a decades-old grand jury probe just revealed about the Molar Report." I knew we would get back to the Molar Report, and good reason to do it. By Deanna K., this last name, okay, El Malawani. I'm guessing at that pronunciation, you can tell it's L-E-L hyphen M-A-L-L-A-W-A-N-Y. What do you make of that? El Malawani. All right, well, we're just about up on our break here, But again, I'll give you that teaser of a headline and then the subheader, and then we'll get back to the substance of it after the break. What a decades-old grand jury probe just revealed about the Molar Report. A federal court decision on last Friday, when we were taping, shows how Congress can finally get its hands on the special counsel's work. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, swirling around getting a hold of the special counsel's work, and of course the tax returns, another story we need to follow up on, which we'll get to right after this break. We'll see what she has to say on that front in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's dive right into this piece. Deanna L. Malawani is counsel at Protect Democracy, which you can find on Twitter at, unsurprisingly, Protect Democracy. Well, actually, it's spelled different. That's interesting. I don't know whether I assume, well, let's assume it's not a typo. It's Protct, trying to condense it and I guess use less characters. Protect Democracy. There's no E in there somehow. Don't know exactly why, but anyway, also a former assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Massachusetts. So again, what a decades-old grand jury probe just revealed about the Mueller report. A federal court decision on Friday shows how Congress can finally get its hands on the special counsel's work. Let's see if it gets around the problem of Donald Trump saying, nuh-uh, no way. On Friday, a federal court decision about a decades-old grand jury investigation clarified one of the biggest fights in Washington: how the complete special counsel report on Russian election meddling can get to Congress. Well, we've got some ideas about that. Let's see what this one is. A divided panel of the D.C. Federal Appeals Court in McKeever versus Barr, I guess he's on everything now, denied a scholar's request for material from a 1957 grand jury investigation. Wow, I'm going to have to slow down and read this carefully. Divided panel of the D.C. Federal Appeals Court in McKeever versus Barr denied a scholar's request for material from a 1957 grand jury investigation into the disappearance of a Columbia University professor and political activist, Jesus Galindez. Does this ring a bell with anybody? 1957 disappearance. While not addressing the Mueller investigation directly, obviously, McKeever may have foreclosed public access to secret grand jury material in the report for now. But Congress still has a path forward in the ensuing fight to obtain a complete unredacted version. At the crux of the issue is the age-old tradition of grand jury secrecy. That tradition, which has been codified into federal rules at Rule 6E, which Armando has discussed with us, prohibits government attorneys from disclosing any information obtained through the D.C.-based grand jury that Special Counsel Robert Mueller used in his investigation. The question in McKeever was whether a court has inherent authority, enclosed in quotes here, inherent authority to release grand jury material under special circumstances. Breaking with established law in other federal courts of appeal, which puts it on shaky ground, really, but breaking with that established law, 2 out of the 3 judges on this panel decided that no such inherent authority exists. Who did so and why? The court's authority to release grand jury information, it held, is limited to specific exceptions listed in Rule 6E, including one that allows the court to release grand jury information, quote, preliminarily to or in connection with a judicial proceeding, unquote. The judicial proceedings exception came into play the two times in the 20th century when a sitting president was subject to independent investigation. The first time was in the 1970s when Watergate Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski sent his roadmap of President Richard Nixon's involvement in Watergate to Congress. We've read about that one. We at Protect Democracy, with the E and everything, a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to preserving and strengthening democratic institutions. Everyone loves those democratic institutions. We at Protect Democracy helped bring the roadmap into the world last October. It was, of course, already in the world. It was just hidden. But I get what your meaning is here. The second time that this happened was in the 1990s when independent counsel Ken Starr delivered his report on President Bill Clinton's misconduct to Congress. It could come into play again soon if the House Judiciary Committee petitions Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the D.C. Federal Court for access to Mueller's grand jury material. Judge Howell has been presiding over all legal matters arising from Mueller's grand jury. Now, in 1974, Jaworski's team argued that the disclosure was permissible under Rule 6E because the Judiciary Committee's impeachment inquiry was equivalent to a judicial proceeding. Remember that argument? Chief Judge John Sirica, Howell's predecessor, allowed the disclosure, but his decision left some uncertainty as to whether he relied on the court's inherent disclosure authority or the judicial proceedings exception. The D.C. Federal Appeals Court affirmed Judge Sirica's opinion in Haldeman versus Sirica. Okay. The court's McKeever decision on Friday clarified that in Haldeman, the Watergate roadmap was released to the House Judiciary Committee pursuant to the judicial proceedings exception, not the court's inherent authority. Okay, starting to become clearer here why this would work. Some might argue that for Congress to access grand jury material under the judicial proceedings exception, it must have a formal impeachment inquiry underway. We did hear that argument earlier, last week, I think. But that argument overlooks another key historical precedent, the Starr Report. Interesting, because the Starr Report is usually singled out as different in kind because it was produced under the now expired independent counsel statute. Let's see what they have to say about that. Starr got judicial approval using the judicial proceedings exception to send his report to the House Judiciary Committee before the committee had done any investigation of its own into Clinton's alleged wrongdoing. In fact, it was the Starr Report itself that eventually prompted impeachment proceedings for Clinton. Even more telling, the judicial proceedings exception allowed the final report of the Iran-Contra investigation to reach the public in 1994. Obviously, the court of public opinion is not a judicial proceeding, but the D.C. Federal Appeals Court didn't let that stand in the way of the enormous public interest in the investigation's findings. The court concluded that its own adjudication of whether to release the report constituted the judicial proceeding required by the rule. Oh, that's really interesting. I can't imagine that surviving with conservative judges. I can't imagine it surviving with conservative judges sitting on the question of whether or not information damaging to a conservative administration should be released. I could see them all too thrilled to give it life if a Democratic administration was the one in jeopardy. But interesting. So I guess they're saying the court's own consideration of whether to release the report is a judicial proceeding by itself, and therefore that's really Yeah, I probably wouldn't even agree with that one myself, to be honest. But, at the time, I might certainly have been moved politically as a political actor. If I guess I'll just admit to the bias and make Armando happy, he would have me pegged as a federal judge. I would feel bad about that, though. I don't know. Maybe in that situation, I would say, yeah, we can't invent our own judicial proceeding this way. I mean, I don't know. I guess it would depend on why was I considering this thing. I mean, it can't just be the case that anything that occurs to a federal judge during his drive to work is a judicial proceeding, right? They were already involved in judicial proceedings, and the question was asked at that point, should we release this information? I don't know. I find that weak. Now, back to the article. Here, the House Judiciary Committee is exercising its constitutional authority to investigate allegations of the Trump administration's obstruction of justice and other abuses of power. It launched its investigation on March 4th and authorized a subpoena for the full Molar Report on April 3rd. The full House of Representatives, moreover, has passed a resolution 420-0. Remember that? Calling on the Justice Department to make Mueller's complete report available to Congress. The constitutional imperatives are clear. This is true. But again, I want to throw out there a reminder that so far it hasn't been addressed, that the Starr Report has a very different, it comes from a different place, having been generated by an independent counsel that had its own statutory dictates, which do not apply, despite the similarity to special counsel investigations. We're very frequently reminded in special counsel cases that this isn't an independent counsel and the rules are different. Now, Attorney General William Barr should support transparency. He should. But so what? And join Chairman Nadler in seeking an order from Chief Judge Howell granting Congress access to grand jury material in the Mueller report. And he should also sing Kumbaya while he does it. But okay. Even if Nadler is forced to petition the court without the DOJ's backing, Howell will have the discretion to craft an order allowing disclosure to Congress with whatever limitations on or allowance for further disclosure she deems appropriate. Howell's analysis will require a balancing of Congress's need for the information against the justifications for grand jury secrecy. Okay, quite honestly, so far at this point, it occurs to me that I'm not seeing any great influence coming out of the recent decision cited up top, McKeever versus Barr, in fixing this. It seems to me that Judge Howell has the same options available with or without McKeever. But okay, I guess maybe anything is available to you. If anything a judge ponders is a judicial proceeding. All right, Howell's analysis will require balancing Congress's need for the information against the justifications for grand jury secrecy. What could be weightier than Congress's constitutional obligation to determine whether the president abused his power and obstructed the special counsel's investigation of Russian interference with the 2016 presidential election, and whether legislation is needed to prevent such acts in the future? Not much, I guess. But like her predecessor facing a matter of the most critical moment to the nation in 1974, Howell should find it, quote, difficult to conceive of a more compelling need than that of this country for an unswervingly fair inquiry, based on all the pertinent information, unquote. The health of our democracy should, as it has in the past, tilt the scales in favor of disclosure to Congress. I agree with the conclusion. I don't get the premise. I'm kind of head back for a second here. Remind myself of what happened here. A divided D.C. federal appeals court. Was it 2-1, I guess? What we learned was that they decided in their ruling that, where was it stated? that it must have been the judicial proceedings exception rather than inherent authority. Yeah, I guess so. The court's McKeever decision on Friday clarified that in Haldeman, the Watergate Roadmap was released to the House Judiciary Committee pursuant to the judicial proceedings exception, not the court's inherent authority. Okay, fine. And so, to be honest with you, I'm not getting the connection, and I don't see what McKeever does to change that, or why it took the bringing of the McKeever, I guess most accurately, why you would think McKeever was the catalyst that drove them to clarify that it must have been in Haldeman the judicial proceedings exception and not inherent authority. Because also, honestly, they could have probably skipped that question and said either one would have been sufficient. And honestly, the way they ended up describing the judicial proceedings here, this other one, with the Iran-Contra approach, that the very fact that the court was pondering whether or not to release the information at all was itself a judicial proceeding. In other words, I mean, what's really happening in the Iran-Contra one is that the court is considering whether or not it should release the information because of the great public interest in it, and would there probably have come to rest on the conclusion that we think it's good for America, and so we'll exercise our inherent authority to release the information. But instead, I guess they were afraid of invoking inherent authority for some reason, because it is sort of like a whatever you want, a catch-all sort of escape clause for the courts. But I mean, what the hell? Why not? You're an article of the Constitution, for God's sake. Give yourself inherent authority. Everybody else does. But if that scares you, then the very fact that I'm pondering the question of whether or not I have inherent authority is a judicial proceeding. And so therefore, if I'm afraid of using inherent authority and laying that down as a marker, I'll simply say, no, I'm using the old judicial proceeding exception by pondering whether or not to use my inherent authority. I have created a judicial proceeding. That is very nifty. And I think maybe too clever by half, but apparently it's been used before. And, yeah, I don't know. I might spend a few minutes off the air, reflecting again on whether or not McKeever has anything to do with this, except if it's a, fun and interesting entree into getting your article published. I don't know. Well, that's interesting. It's interesting to see what theories are out there. Good reminder of what the Rule 6E requirements are and exceptions are, and a good lesson in how flexible courts will allow themselves to be in a situation like this, to get, like Armando would say, to the conclusion that they want. Very interesting, and a good look inside the rules and the flexibility surrounding them, and the gray area of inherent authority. It's just, I guess, for those of you who continue to be amazed at the flat assertion that Congress, or the two houses of Congress, can make up their own rules as they go along, even if it seems inherently unfair, or people who express astonishment at the existence of the concept of inherent contempt, the idea that Congress itself can say, well, if you won't give us this information, we will imprison you. Although, again, that has the word imprisonment carries a connotation and is a term of art in itself. We will confine you to a jail, not necessarily, by the way, inside the Capitol. I should remind everybody, since it might come into play again. I don't think so. I don't think they have the guts for it. I've always questioned whether they have the guts for it. And the fact that they're still contemplating, well, a Russian agent might be president here, but still, optics, it tells you all you need to know about the likelihood of inherent contempt. But the CRS reports on inherent contempt and the descriptions I've given to you very often refer to the fact that pseudo-fact. I don't even know whether it's really true. People keep claiming it over and over again, but I've never seen it. That there was some space in the basement of the Capitol that I don't know whether it was originally designed for this purpose. I don't think so, but it ended up getting used as a jail cell. And I think for a while they may have used it for those purposes, mostly whatever served as the Capitol Police back in the day. I don't think that's been an organization that's been around forever. But that they could use it to hold unruly, members of the public or whatever before they were picked up by the local constabulary, and transferred to the DC jail. But I think that there was such a space. I think it was long since converted to some other use. And though there exists the possibility of reconverting it if necessary, I think the discussions such as they have been in the years since, that whenever the Congress is considering using an inherent contempt authority, or indeed whenever the Capitol Police have made arrests, they just tend to use DC municipal jails to hold their people, their detainees. And I think that they would do the same there. But I would throw that out there just so you're not disappointed when, if it ever really does happen. How you could be disappointed if it ever really does happen. How could you be disappointed if inherent contempt is ever used? Republicans use it. Then you'll be disappointed at that juncture. But could you be disappointed with the Democrats using it? Maybe. Right now, I heard there was a jail cell in the Capitol and I wanted them to use that. That sounded like official and cool and archaic. And they're just using the DC jail, the city jail for this. How unromantic is that? Well, okay. It may happen that way. Don't be disappointed. Somebody gets thrown in jail. Be happy with that. Unless it's you. All right. Let's see. Other things that I want to share with people in the closing minutes of today. Let's see. This appears related. Let me refresh my memory about what's going on here. Okay. This is on immigration front. So I'll save that for another day. But it caught my attention because it was grousing about, I can't believe this is legal and what the president is thinking of doing, and it probably isn't legal. Yeah, it's probably not. And, another big story of the day, just to acknowledge, yes, I did hear this. We'll cover this. We'll discuss it, I'm sure, tomorrow with Greg and with Joan. The mounting realization of just how frequently President Trump purports to order people to violate the law in furtherance of his old cranks pipe dream of how things really should be in this country, and how most of the people being purged from the Department of Homeland Security, we now suspect, are being fired for their unwillingness to violate the law on his whim. And that, that too could become an important consideration in proceedings in Congress, which may or may not be deemed judicial in nature later on, let's say. All right. Another note of esoterica, but needs to be reiterated. Greg, I believe, did mention this, and I didn't get exactly what he was driving at the time. NBC News reporting that New York's Democratic state lawmakers now are, it says here, they ready a new front to obtain Trump's tax returns. Had forgotten about this as an avenue, and it's good news to hear. A bill was introduced in the state legislature in New York that would allow Congress, the federal Congress, to request the president's state tax filings. If you're having difficulty getting the IRS to comply because it's a branch of, a part of the executive branch, and unitary executive theory says that the president can order the IRS commissioner or the Treasury secretary to refuse to comply with the law that otherwise flatly states that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House is entitled to any tax return he requests, so long as they're requested for something near legitimate purposes, and it might not even require that, quite honestly. If that doesn't work for you because they simply refuse to comply with the law and you can't get anybody to prosecute the Treasury Secretary or the IRS Commissioner or the President or anybody else for inherent contempt of Congress in their refusal to comply, then you can come calling here in New York State and ask for his state tax returns. And all the information is supposed to be the same. Of course, I suppose it's possible that he could have filed a different total lie with the state, but that would raise another question later on, and I guess give even more reason for a court to agree to order the IRS to relinquish the federal returns just to see if they match. I say check the paperwork on everything. This mantra of mine might become important later on. Alan Smith reporting for NBC News. Look, what do you want to know? I hope it's a short bit, but it looks like it's longer than that. They must have asked him for more words. As congressional Democrats begin what could be a tumultuous battle to obtain President Donald Trump's tax returns, New York lawmakers are trying to make it easier for them to get their hands on the president's state filings. And that would be up to them, wouldn't it? I'd like to see what Trump comes up with. Trump, he could just purport to order the federal government to block the state's ability to forward. I declare the mail system closed, and I'm banning all travel from New York to the I don't know what he would come up with. Legislators introduced a bill Monday that would amend the state law, they got to change it, to permit New York Department of Taxation and Finance Commissioner to release any state tax return requested by leaders of, you'll never guess, the House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, or the Joint Committee on Taxation for any specific and legitimate legislative purpose. The bill seeks to amend state laws which generally prohibit the release of such tax information. Do they not have the ability to release it to the state legislature? I wonder. Well, Congress would be a different creature, of course. If passed, the congressional committees will have to file a request with the state after other efforts to gain access to federal tax filings through the Treasury have failed. So it seems specifically tailored to as a backstop to the anticipated fight at the federal level. A good idea and very interesting, and I'm glad that it came up, and thanks to Greg for noting it. Just wanted to clarify that is underway, and we'll see where that leads. One last thing I think I'm able to share before closing things out, though it's almost time for our music. Sarah Binder's piece from the other day that Greg shared with me, which I will save him the trouble of using some of his time tomorrow, because sometimes he comes back and brings these things back to my attention if I haven't given them their due. Also, as always, from the Monkey Cage blog at the Washington Post, the Republican Senate went nuclear again. We'll definitely talk about that once again. Maybe Joan's over it at this point. She's angry about it, but is done with talking about it. But let's see what Sarah Binder has to say about it. The Republican Senate just went nuclear again to speed up the confirming of conservative judges. Here are 4 takeaways from the Senate's shift toward majority rule. Let's see if there are any that we haven't had yet. We'll skip over the background information. You know what happened. All but 2 Senate Republicans, by the way, voted against the 46 Democrats to limit floor debate after cloture on nominations. There was, of course, the old rule that allowed 30 hours. The Senate move, she says, is important. First, by shrinking the time for post-cloture debate, it limits the ability of senators to go on record with their views about controversial nominees and potentially to sway colleagues. Second, the way Republicans went about changing the rules will make it easier for future majorities to strengthen the majority's power, which is new because the Senate has traditionally required supermajority support to get much done. Here's what happened and why. The Senate bent the rules to change the rules. You all know about how nuclear policy works there in the Senate. How did they do it? Instead of rewriting the rule, the Republicans voted to set a new chamber precedent that reinterpreted the rule. From then on, 30, quote, 30 hours of debate would be interpreted to mean 2. And here's the kicker. The Senate adopts precedents by a simple majority rule, not by 60. You know about that. And by the way, I guess if you were astonished with our discussion earlier about what could be a judicial proceeding and what could not, I told you the comparison to the legislative branch's ability to redefine even days of the week and how long they last. What does 30 mean? It now means 2. So let's see. That's only one of the 4 takeaways. Republicans have paved the way to stack the federal bench. We know all about that. That's takeaway number 2. Democrats lose a toehold for blocking nominees. That's the flip side. And another step toward majority rule. I don't know. Nothing terribly revealing there, but I'm glad we got that on the record. I'll share it with you for your perusal. And stay tuned for what's coming up next.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, I don't know what made me think I was going to be able to fit that article in about 30 seconds, but I guess I wanted to note it for the record. You're welcome to come back to it, Greg. No problem about that. I don't preclude you from it. Next up, Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I can assure you that he has only the best select dishes for your delicate palate.